So you probably know that on August 20th, here in a few days, we celebrate the official 150th anniversary of New Oxford becoming its own separate, taxable, incorporated borough. And so that's the 150th anniversary. But I should also mention that perhaps you saw this, but New Oxford's doing a historical walk of the people that were on the initial borough council of New Oxford in the New Oxford Cemetery, and that was scheduled for tomorrow night at 6:30 p.m. But because of the rain, it has actually been moved to Wednesday night at 6:30 in the New Oxford Cemetery. And if you weren't thinking about going now, maybe you can consider going. It'd be a nice tour of the cemetery. Adams County became its own separate county in 1800. And prior to 1800, our area was originally part of Chester County, one of the three original counties laid out in the state of Pennsylvania. And in 1729, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania was formed, and we were actually part of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. And so some of our townships were laid out while we were Lancaster County, and the first settlers came here for the most part while we were Lancaster County, and the roads were established here while we were Lancaster County. In 1749, York County was formed out of the western townships, the townships on the other side of the Susquehanna River from Lancaster. And so York County, we were York County from 1749 until 1800. And of course, there were towns established in our area while we were still York County. And there are 8 towns formed in our area while we were York County, Pennsylvania, and 5 of them were laid out prior to the American Revolution. So just a little bit of background. Of course, Abbottstown was laid out in 1763. And I should mention, sometimes when a village becomes a town, or when a area that is owned by one individual becomes officially a town, it's very difficult. Sometimes it's a series of events that occur that makes it a town. And so when you go around Adams County, you might see signs going into different towns saying when they were laid out, and those signs might be absolutely inaccurate. For many years, Abbottstown had a sign. I think they probably still have one somewhere around, saying they were laid out in the 1740s. And basically, they're talking about when John Abbott purchased land. It has nothing to do with the town being laid out. But Abbottstown, 1763, the first references we have to it. Hunterstown in East Berlin are 1764. Littlestown and McSherrystown are 1765. Fairfield, I think, 1783. Gettysburg, 1786. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yep, there's 8. Okay, so there are the 8 towns in the county that are laid out while we're still York, towns there. Of course, New Oxford is, I didn't talk about that yet, 1792. And I just thought I'd put a nice little postcard, colorized postcard that was printed and sold in New Oxford. I think it's from like 1906, of the center of the town. The early roads through this area, earliest roads are pretty much east-west roads, and they connected this area, the settlers here, with the area of York, and of course before that Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, which would have been the county seats for those 2 counties and very important areas to travel into and out of. But the first confirmed road in our area, and again, while it's still Lancaster County, is the Monocacy Road, which is basically goes from the Monocacy River down near Frederick, Maryland, through the area of Littlestown into the area of Hanover and Abbottstown, and eventually over towards York. And this, of course, this goes through the corner of the county. So, and these roads, they're probably laid out on well-established trails. I remember it wasn't too many weeks ago, we had a discussion in here, and someone told me that this road was laid out because it was the road that buffaloes traveled on. And so I was taken aback by that. And so I got on the internet, if anybody wants to do this, and there's it's like a conspiracy theory that there were once roaming buffaloes in Pennsylvania. And it turns out that no evidence of buffaloes has ever been found in Pennsylvania. I think they were basing it on the fact that there's townships in Pennsylvania named after buffaloes, buffalo townships, and there's landmarks named after buffaloes, and there must have been buffaloes here. But if you hear somebody say that, there's no way that was an old buffalo trail. I never heard that before, but yeah, it's a whole thing on the internet. So the real first road that connects the county and the settlements with the area, not just goes through the corner, is the 1747 road, again, laid out while we're still Lancaster County. And basically, this road comes out of York, Pennsylvania, crossed York County into what would eventually be Abbottstown, and then through the area that would eventually be New Oxford. And then I talked about this on our Adams County bus tour last Saturday. There's a split where this road divides into two sections, and that split is still there. It's Swift Run Road. And the northern section is Swift Run Road to Hunterstown, and then, of course, it becomes Shriver's Corner Road, Goldenville Road, Hilltown Road, and then Old Route 30 across to what is referred to as Black's Gap. The southern portion of this road, which is generally referred to as the Black's Gap Road in early documents, and this is referred to as the Marsh Creek Road, the lower road. And this road basically is Old Route 30 from Swift Run Road to Gettysburg, and then 116 to Fairfield, and I don't know why I have Charnita on this map. It dates like from 1973 or something. So, this passes through the gap there, the Monterey Gap, or sometimes called the Nichols Gap or the Nicholson Gap. But you can see this on the map. And of course, in 1749, 1750, we had the Manawan Road, which basically leads from York across York County to the Manawan Meeting House, which originally was near Center Mills Road. It was in what we refer to as Center Mills. And although that church was later moved, over towards Bendersville, the cemetery for that early church still exists near Center Mills. So I like this map because you can just get a simple idea of the early road system that the settlers would have used. And then, of course, that their wagons would be coming off of these roads, and there would be trails that led to the individual farms. So some of these roads existed, they just aren't shown on maps, and they weren't official county roads. But Dr. Gladfelter did a lot of work on the early roads in our area when he, started as a historian at the Adams County Historical Society. And there are documents on these roads giving you the distance and courses, and some of them are in Lancaster County, Historical Society or Lancaster County Archives, and some are in York County. But you can find evidence of these. Now, after the French and Indian War, the Port of Baltimore emerged as a major economic powerhouse. And then there was more of a desire to have roads that led in that direction. So most of the north-south roads were laid out a little bit later, and you can see those going through the area. And wherever the north-south roads intersect with the east-west roads, of course, little towns and villages develop. And here you can see some of those early roads. We have 94, and you can see laid out about 1770, 1771. And then, we have the Oxford Road, I think here we have on the map, like 1770. And, 1769, we have the Baltimore-Shippensburg Road laid out. And this, of course, is the Baltimore Turnpike to Gettysburg, and then the Mummersburg Road, and then the old Shippensburg Road up and over the mountains. Because, of course, when it was laid out, everyone believed Shippensburg was going to be like the major town in south central Pennsylvania. And Shippensburg just never developed. Shippensburg was a very important town because it was the gateway to western Pennsylvania early on. And then Chambersburg was established a few miles, south of it. And from that point on, people went to Chambersburg and then traveled westward. And Shippensburg kind of lost some of its, it was kind of replaced by Chambersburg as that gateway, I guess I'm trying to say. So, but early on, we have the Baltimore-Shippensburg Road, and of course we get that really nice stretch that goes up and over Big Flats. So if you're gonna ride over that through Adams County. I think the road over Big Flats, there's a point where it's the highest road that you can be on in Adams County, not going to one of the peaks off to the right or left of the South Mountains. But that's kind of the early road system. So we have some early maps, and you might know that it was actually Mike that got me a really nice version of this 1770 map in color. I'll show next slide. I have a kind of an old black and white copy that we've had for many years. But this is the Nicholas Skull map, and there are versions of it that date from the 1750s, but this is like a updated 1770 version of the map, and it shows Pennsylvania, but I just have the York County, Pennsylvania section highlighted here. Of course, it has the temporary line between Maryland and Pennsylvania. This would be the 1739 line that was agreed on between the authorities of Maryland and Pennsylvania. And then, of course, in 1765, that would be officially surveyed by Mason and Dixon. But you can see here York, Pennsylvania. And you can see that by 1750, some of the townships, or I should say the 1770, this is 1770, but he still didn't make that correction on the map. The line wasn't officially adopted until like 1774, but you can see the township names on here. And I'll go to a different version of it. And you can see this is the one Dr. G had made a copy of that we've had here at the Society for years. But you can see the roads coming out of York, and you can see the town of Berwick, which is Abbott's town. I wonder if I have that circled. Okay. So which is Abbott's town. And then you can kind of see the Little Conewago Creek, and you can see where that's actually right there is like a Swift Run. So you can kind of see the Swift Run Road and the 1747 road that goes through the area there. And so this the reason this is important, of course, this is the area that would become New Oxford. Here is the Reading Howell map from 1792. And of course, remember, it's about 1792 that Henry Kuhn lays out Oxford, or New Oxford. And so here I just, on this map, I wanted to just show some of the areas we're discussing here. And again, there's Berwick, which will become Abbottstown. John Abbott founded the town of Berwick, and of course Berwick Township, and then eventually that would become Abbottstown. And we have Berlin, which of course would become Berlin. Let me state this, because I don't think I put this anywhere in the slideshow, that there was an issue when post office started to establish towns along these postal routes in Pennsylvania. And the post office determined that there could not be two towns with the same name in the state of Pennsylvania. It would get very confusing. Like if there were, at one time in Adams County, we had Petersburg, which was Littlestown, and then we had Petersburg, which was York Springs, and there was a Petersburg somewhere else already. So they changed, Peter Little was the founder of Littlestown, or Petersburg. So they named, his name was Peter Klein, you probably know. And so it was Petersburg, or sometimes it was referred to as Kleinstadel. And they changed it to Littlestown. So, one of my favorite statements, isn't this week good old days in Littlestown? So if you go there, I want you to tell the people who live in Littlestown that they've been declined. That's a good historical joke, no? But you can see Petersburg here on the map. And then, I don't know if York Springs is not shown on there yet, it's too early. So York Sulphur Springs became the post office for York Springs, but was also known as Petersburg. And Berlin, there's another place called Berlin in Somerset County. So our town became East Berlin. And when Oxford was established, the town of Oxford, there was another Oxford in Chester County, Pennsylvania. I believe it's in Chester County, right? And so we became New Oxford. And this has nothing to do with anything else except the post office. Yeah. So you just can't, there. And I think it's a good idea, because people would just write letters and put, Tim Smith, Oxford. And how would the post office know which town it was supposed to go to? So, but on this map, you can see where the creek crosses, and you can kind of get an idea of where New Oxford would be in the Swift Run Road intersection there. I also like the map because they show like early taverns. Like, look, McClellan's. There's a Black Horse Tavern on this map. Leitner's. I like Leitner's. I think that tavern, when I plot it on some early maps, it seems to be near the Freedom Valley Church out on Route 30 East, like right across the road. Oh, I even circled it. Okay. So there's the area of New Oxford. And you can see the road coming up into the area of what would be New Oxford from the south. I think when we see it where it's Slagle's there, I think that is near 94 going into Hanover. Okay. Oh, I even made a little close-up of it there so you can kind of see. So in Pennsylvania, there's really a three-step process to acquiring land. There's what we refer to as a warrant. And I think it's kind of hard to see here. I think I have this in the slideshow because it's Henry Kuhn's warrant for his land. And, or is this the patent deed? I don't even know which one I put in here. But on a lot of these pieces of land, what's that? Okay, the patent deed. So you would apply for a warrant of land. And a warrant is basically a request for an official survey to be done for a piece of property. So let's say you asked for 300 acres. You had to pay a certain amount of money for how many per acre for the amount of acres you asked to be surveyed. So that's why people don't ask for like a generic 1,000. I want 1,000 acres, because you're gonna have to pay for this warrant for the amount of land you asked for. And usually people ask for like 100 acres or 200 acres or 150 acres, something even. And then a surveyor would eventually be sent out to your piece of land. And the surveyors were official surveyors that were appointed sometimes at the county level or the state of Pennsylvania, the Commonwealth level. And they would have access to the land office and the land records, and they would know where everyone else's piece of property was located. And so they would come out and they would survey tracts of land. And let's say, you might ask for 200 acres, but other people had already surveyed land around you. So maybe only 129 acres was available. And that's how you ended up with a piece of land. Now, sometimes the surveyors made mistakes and crossed land. Or in the case of John Diggs, of Diggs Choice, he might make his surveys with the state of Maryland, claiming that he had land in Maryland. And when the Pennsylvania surveyors came out, Diggs' land wasn't well marked, so the lines crossed. So it can be a little complicated. This map here that shows the area of New Oxford today, this is a map done by Neil Hively. And it's what we refer to as a connected land draft. I don't know if I'm a big fan of this. I mean, it's something you can look at and you can go on and you can understand, where land was. But, he gives the date of the warrant for these particular pieces of land. And the date of the warrant is not the date of the survey. And so if somebody asked for like 300 acres, but only 100 acres was available, the warrant, he might envision a bigger piece of land. And the person asking for the warrant is different often than the person that asked for the survey. So I think what he's trying to show on this map, he shows the survey, but then he shows the earliest known person who asked for the warrant, which again, can be different people. Now, the surveyor would come out, do a survey, and then once you had the survey for your land, the state would tell you how much you had to pay for the land. In Pennsylvania, pretty much there was an established rate for every acre of land, and that rate changed over the years. But let's say you had 129 acres and then you had to pay so much per acre, and then you would pay the land office. And again, I suspect that the surveyor was doing all this. The surveyor would help you. Of course, you have to pay the surveyor to survey your land. But then he would tell you how much you owe. You paid him, and then he would, give the money to the land office. And eventually, the land office would issue a patent deed for your property. This process could take years. And in the case of like around Gettysburg and the Manor of Mask, some of these process and of course, before you asked for a warrant, you were a squatter. But I've seen land that was settled, and 60 years later, they get a patent deed. So it could be a course of many years and many owners. And what's really weird, and you can sell your land before you get a patent deed. So you can be a squatter and you can sell your land. And then you could have a warrant and no survey, and you can sell your land. And then you have a surveyor done, you can sell, that's really nice. Now you can sell the land. And then you have a patent deed and you can sell your land. It's very difficult, though, to divide your land and sell pieces off of your land until you have a patent deed. And that's why the patent deed is important when you're creating a town. But these are the early owners of the property around what would become New Oxford. And I should point out that this isn't that Neil Hively map, which was created in the early 2000s. That map was based on his research, but really based on the research of Dr. Gladfelter and Arthur Weiner. And Arthur Weiner, you can see in 1986, had done the connected land draft for the area around New Oxford. One of the interesting things you might pick up, and this goes for all the land in Pennsylvania, on the warrant, they asked you to name the property. And sometimes these people getting the warrants, they don't even live here. So you can live in Philadelphia and get a warrant for land in Adams County. And then if you really want, you can have somebody survey that land and, and then eventually get a patent deed, but you don't even have to live here. So you just give it a name. And you can see the early name of the area that would become New Oxford is Providence. And I get a big kick out of that people think that that's like an earlier name of the town. Or that if you find one of these names on a warrant for your property, that somehow people called it that. Usually, they gave it a name at the time of the warrant, and that's the last time that name was ever seen or ever used. I mentioned this on Adams County bus tour last week. Up near Shriver's Corner on Old Route 15, just before you get to it, there's a trailer mobile home park, a trailer park, and it's called Castle Hill. And somehow, I don't know how they figured it out, but that's the name given to that tract of land on the warrant. So they're using that as like the name of the area. But anyway, I just wanted to say that, so you should find out where you live on this Neil Hively map and look and see what name was given to it in the 1750s and 60s. And then you guys should like put a sign out on your property with that name on it, don't you think? And the names are really, really funny. You can see like Pottersfield, Polk's Choice, Providence, and some of them are like, David's Folly, or Choice is used a lot. But I really like that. But those names are never, ever, ever used. So New Oxford was never called Providence, I would suggest. But you can see that Frederick Kuhn eventually put together two of these tracts of land that would become the area of Oxford when he laid it out. Here, if you look at John Henderson's Potter's Field, which was not originally part of New Oxford, but then, of course, today, that's part of New Oxford. Whoop, pushed the wrong one. We have a survey for that property. And I like the surveys because, we have copies of the original surveys, and we have some of the original surveys in our collection here. And you can get an idea of the names of the creeks that they were given and the names of some of the early roads. And here is the two tracts of land that were pulled together that would eventually become Oxford. And you can see Frederick Kuhn got a survey here in 1768, and John Oliver sold his land to Frederick Kuhn in 1769. So these are basically the two tracks. And you see there's a road running through the middle of the area. And you can see it's the road from Yorktown to Marsh Creek Settlement. And again, Marsh Creek Road generally refers to the lower portion of the road when it splits off at Swift Run that runs through the area of Gettysburg. And we do have a survey from James Geddes, and it says on the survey, the Marsh Creek Road. So although these roads really don't have names, there's not really even a reason to have a name. You can see how people referred to these roads on the early surveys. And of course, you can figure out, you can plot some of these roads and see how close they are today to the modern courses. So Mike Shen made this series of maps for us to give you an idea of how the original layout of New Oxford ties into what we see today. And he put a couple marks on here so we can get our couple lines so we get our bearings as to exactly where the properties come into. But if we lay the Coon tract and the area where his tavern is over top of where the borough is, let's say, oh, I didn't realize that I didn't know it saved all your fancy iterations. Good. But you can see the tracks on the top of it. And then this little map here he has, this is a later draft. It shows where the tavern buildings are. I have that coming up in a minute. So, and that's a survey done in 1770. Oh, that's really nice, Mark. I have not used these in a while, these particular things. So you can see that Coon, and I should mention, we're talking about Frederick Coon. And he would die prior to the town being laid out, and it was his son, Henry, that actually plotted and laid out New Oxford. But Frederick Coon, and sometimes, like in the 1886 history, it's referred to as the Butcher Coon's stand. So obviously he was a butcher. But there you go. I kind of blew this one up so you can get an idea of it. Now, this line coming in here, I believe, is along what today is the East Berlin Road. And again, there's the same lines. You can kind of see where it is today. Now, it's interesting that the East Berlin Road that comes into the borough of New Oxford at one time obviously continued all the way to the Marsh Creek Road over here. What is, Route 30 West there. Let's see. And then, of course, this one again, he's showing us the site of where the tavern was. Let's see. This is that 1770 survey that shows the road and shows Frederick Coon, or later Henry Coon's tavern. And, it's interesting, we talked about how it looks like perhaps, if that's the tavern, that the stables of the tavern and the wagon house could be out in the center of the town today, like in where the square is. Now, you probably know, if you visit New Oxford, and I'm sure it'll be on display in the coming days, and it's at the fire hall, the New Oxford Fire Hall, is the original plot of the town. And it dates from 1792, in which a surveyor was hired, just like in other towns, like in Gettysburg, and a surveyor laid out lots in the town. So they plotted it out. A couple interesting things about it. Of course, this is they laid out a square, and of course today it's a circle. So I think it's interesting, that they lay out a square. Some people call it a diamond, and other people call it a circle. So it depends on your geometrical view of things. But this is the land that the Coons owned. They didn't lay out the land into lots they owned. And also, where this road originally came through, somewhere in here, this was a tannery owned by the Coon family. So they preserved that also. But you can see they laid out a large number of lots. And it would take many, many years before all these lots were developed into, residents, and some are still not really developed. But I find it interesting that there must have been a reason why they could not reroute Hanover Street. And you see it's called Baltimore Street there. And there's some oddly shaped lots on that street, of course, to this day. I just love that survey. And here's kind of what it looks like on top of like a map of the area. And this is kind of how it sits today, north-south. And there's the empty lots. And this is the 1872 Atlas of Adams County. And on it, you can see the lots. One thing that's interesting is they number the lots on the 1872 map. I'm always curious about how when he made the Atlas, it's the Atlas map of Adams County you can buy in our bookstore. But all the towns have their lots numbered. Gettysburg, the lots are numbered. Mummersburg, the lots are numbered. Hampton, Littlestown, New Oxford. Someone had to have gone to these towns and asked to see an original plot plan that had the numbers listed on the maps. So it's just amazing to me that somebody went to that much detail to find out the lot numbers, if they could, in some of these little towns. But you can see the lot numbers. And these lot numbers, if you live in a town like Gettysburg or even Cashtown or Mummersburg, they're usually used in the deeds when they transfer property. So so-and-so is not just buying a house on Pitt Street, they're buying part of lot number 35. And so it's a way for historians to trace the transfers of property by using the numbers of the lots. Now, just like in Gettysburg, I think it's coming up next. Oh, okay. Well, so the plot map is done in 1792, and we have a notice in a York County newspaper from York, Pennsylvania, in December 1792, that Henry Kuhn is laying out a town. I think it's interesting how you might see his name spelled differently in different records. But he's laying out the town of Oxford in Berwick Township. Remember, there's no Oxford Township until 1749. So it's Berwick Township, Pennsylvania, in the early records. And you can purchase lots in said town. And he's really hoping that, and this is 1792. I should mention, as early as 1790, there was talk about the western townships of Adams County being segregated off and forming their own new county. And one of the reasons that Henry Kuhn is laying out the town is because he's hoping that New Oxford has a chance to become the county seat of the new county. Different areas of Adams County vied for the county seat in the 10 years from when they started talking about it until Adams County was established. Hunterstown vied for the county seat. Can you imagine Hunterstown being the county seat? Gettysburg, of course, won the county seat, and they put up money, and they gave a lot of ground for the jail and a place for the courthouse. And when you look at it, it wasn't really fair. Gettysburg was going to win. But Mount Pleasant Township, they had a piece of ground, and they were just going to create a county seat in a place where a town did not exist at that time. I think that's fascinating. But he's offering lots for sale. I like this. Lots are going to be free of ground rent. Gettysburg has $1 a year ground rent if you own a lot in town at that time. Now, so just like Gettysburg, when this town was being found in New Oxford, and Gettysburg is just, 6 years earlier. Henry Kuhn wanted to make it exciting, so he had what we call a lottery, and we are fortunate that we have the actual book that is from the drawing for lots or the lottery. And we have a vague idea of how this occurred. And Dr. Gladfelter did some research on some other towns in York and Lancaster County in the area. And there's a good description of how a town in Lancaster County had one of these drawings. But basically, you buy a ticket. And the ticket wouldn't be that expensive. Let's say the ticket would cost like £1. Like maybe, at that time, what's a pound's like $3. And you weren't winning a lot. You were winning the option to buy that lot. And so what they do is, and New Oxford did it a little bit different. You got it, Joe. Very good. Very good. It's all right. We have 4 mics, so we're not, don't worry. Don't worry. So in Gettysburg, I get the feeling in Gettysburg they sold you the lottery ticket, and then they just had like probably a giant bin. When they do the draft, I've seen it, and they actually have a giant barrel with a wheel on it and a door. And, they just roll these things around. And I guess in Gettysburg, they just reached in and they pulled out your name. Or maybe they came up with your name and you pulled out a number. And then you were signed a lot. It looks like in New Oxford, because they have lot numbers and ticket numbers, that they made it a little more complicated. Like they had 2 bins. And they would reach in and say, okay, ticket number 56, you get 56. Okay, let's see what lot you get. And then he went around and he pulled out a lot number. Now, in Gettysburg, we have the lottery map, and every single lot is assigned to someone. But I get the feeling that James Geddes sold like 100 or so tickets. He had 210 lots. Maybe he sold 150. And then he had extra tickets left over, so he gave one to his niece and his nephew and his mother and his uncle. And New Oxford, he seems to have leftover lots, but he just doesn't, he just keeps them. So he only sells a portion of them. But we have, from April 1793, the original lot book. Or maybe he had already sold some of these other lots. Because again, the town is laid out, the lots are laid out in the end of 1792. And here, we have it on display in the museum. You can kind of see the lot book, the name of the person, their number, their ticket, I believe, and then the lot numbers. Is that right? The lot numbers being over here. Yeah. And you can see Henry Kuhn there on the thing. So it's just fascinating to me. So in Gettysburg, which I know more about the lottery here, only 30% of the people ended up going on to buy the lot that they won. So again, you're not winning a lot. You're winning an option to buy a lot. So why would you enter such a contest if you didn't have any intention of winning or getting a lot? Because you can sell your option for the lot. So let's say you win a lot right on the square of Gettysburg or right on the square of New Oxford. Then you can sell it to someone who wants to put a tavern in, or someone who wants to put a store in and wants a spot right on the center. So you get into it, it's like winning, you're winning the option to buy, and then you can resell that option to someone else. I think that's awesome. Why can't you just buy the lot you want? You can. I'm sure you can afterwards. You can buy it from who, eventually from the person who didn't want it, but this is a way. The whole purpose of this is to sell lots quickly and then make money quickly. So I'd imagine you could just say, hey, I have a new town and there's lots for sale, and just wait for people to slowly buy lots. But it's exciting, don't you think? People, it's like gambling. Yes. Yeah, it is gambling, isn't it? But New Oxford grows slowly. And I wanted to mention, we also have this 1847 map of the area. And this is when they're dividing Berwick Township from what is now Oxford Township. And I think it divides in, I see it in the tax records in 1849. So 2 years later. So what I really get a kick out of is, do you know originally it wasn't going to be called Oxford Township? It's going to be called West Berwick Township. So we had East Berwick Township, and this would be West Berwick Township. Isn't that awesome? Yeah. I don't know. That would be really confusing, wouldn't it? And you can kind of see here on the map, they show New Oxford. I really like how they show the lots going off on like down here. I guess that's supposed to be like Hanover Street. I don't think it's drawn to scale. I think that's one of the issues of the map with the borough there. But it's really nice. Oh, I wanted to also mention that on this map, let's see, I think Henry Gitt's Tavern shown here. Oh yeah, there it is. It's hard to see right here on this version, but it does say Gitt. And that's 94. And we know that Henry Gitt had a tavern there as early as 1809 because we have the sign, that gives his date of establishment. And, I had to be honest about this sign. Sure, that was an old sign that hung at the tavern, but, a lot of people think it's from 1809. I think he's putting that as the establishment date of his tavern. That doesn't mean the sign's from 1809. The sign, maybe I'm wrong, but I think, the sign seems like it's more like 1830 or 1840 or 1850 to me. But Henry Gitt. So there's the Cross Keys Tavern. Of course, that area is called Cross Keys today. But I love, when we have people visit the tavern, I'm like, what town is this? What town do you think that might be? People don't get it that often. I guess if you're not from here, you're not going to know where Cross Keys is anyway. But that's awesome. But it's shown on that 1847 map. And again, you can see Deals Mill, and the road for Swift Run would be over here in the Conewaga Creek. I think that's pretty awesome. Let's see. Oh, I put this in here. Mike really likes this. So for many years, New Oxford was slow in developing. And in a 1880 book where they talk about it, they talk about, New Oxford bore a striking resemblance to Goldsmith's deserted village. And so Mike went out of his way to find out what the deserted village was, and it was a poem. But there's a great description in 1880 history about New Oxford and how slow it was to develop. Now, so here's some population figures of New Oxford. And you can see 1810, 1820, 1830. So you can get an idea of the population of the town. And I think I just did recently, when I did a program on New Oxford, the 2020 figure for New Oxford, 2020 census is 1,869, in case you're curious. So presently about 1,800. Oh, so are we saying it's gone down over the years? Interesting. Of course, they could be changing, messing with the borough. And in Gettysburg, we have issues because it seems like they keep changing who they count and who they don't count as a resident of the borough. Like the college kids. Do we count college kids as people? So I think when I looked at our 2020 census figure was lower than the 2010 in Gettysburg. And I think a lot had to do with I don't know why that one's lower. But you can see that once the borough is incorporated, then the population climbs. So the early history of New Oxford, a lot of those lots that we were just talking about were not as developed. And we have a nice 1846 description of New Oxford as a post village of Berwick Township. Again, that's before we had Oxford Township, on the turnpike leading from York to Gettysburg. And they actually mention it was laid out in this 1846 history. They mention it was laid out in 1742 by Henry Kuhn. And at that time, it had 33 dwellings. These descriptions of the towns in this book are just fabulous because he give us things, 2 stores, a tavern, Union Church, great stuff. And of course, they talk about the New Oxford College and Medical Institution, which I'm going to talk about here in a minute. And here is the area of New Oxford on the 1858 Adams County wall map. And again, you can see a large portion of the original lots that had been laid out just didn't really, they weren't developed until later. And of course, if you look east of the square, again, I'm going to talk about this in a moment, we have our Medical Collegiate Institute there. And then, of course, the railroad came in through New Oxford in 1858. And that would be a major boom to the area, the railroad coming in. And it was a railroad station originally on Hanover Street and later, moved to its current location up on Pitt Street. And a couple things I wanted to mention is on that map, of course, we have the residence of William Himes on the square. And I hope that's the right spot I put this in. Okay. So this is a house that for many years was painted yellow. And of course, this is a view of it from 1889. And we're coming on the road from Gettysburg, which is referred to as Pitt Street. Is it still Pitt Street? It's called Lincoln Way West, right? Does anybody still call it Pitt Street? Do you get mail for Pitt Street? Mike lives on Pitt Street. And we're near the center, we're looking here southwest at the Himes house. But here, obviously, it's not painted. You might notice that they've just repainted it recently blue. Looks very nice. In this photograph, which again is taken of the Himes family in 1889, shows William D. Himes back there and his wife. And I think this is one of his sons. I think it's William Alexander Himes. We know the date of the photograph based on the ages of his children in the image. And I think we have a good version of this that was recently donated to us. And I say recently, like 4 years ago. There was a lady that lived on Broadway here in Gettysburg, and her husband's family was directly related to the Himes. And we got some really cool stuff from them dealing with the American Civil War and the Himes family and some of the early history of New Oxford. Also, they have their dog here in the view, and I think, if I remember correctly, his name is Puss. So I guess their dog's kind of small, so like a pussy cat. That's what I'm assuming. but great image of this. Now, one of the older William D. Himes' son was Charles Francis Himes. And he grew up in New Oxford. And he went to Dickinson in Carlisle, became somewhat of a scientist. Later, he ended up teaching at Dickinson. And they have his collection there, including his diaries and letters that he wrote. And he wrote a letter detailing the Battle of Gettysburg and the Gettysburg Campaign in on October 2nd, 1863, if I recall. And we have his 1863 diary with all kinds of really interesting detail in it that we would not otherwise have of New Oxford during the Gettysburg Campaign. And a couple interesting things about him. He was part of this amateur photography club. And we know of other members of this organization that took photographs. And I guess the way it worked, I think it's called the Amateur Photography Exchange, where there would be photographers, and once a month you would send a stereo card, and he's holding a stereo card in this portrait of himself. You would go out, take a photograph, make copies of it, and if there were 10 other members of I don't remember how many members there were of this organization, you would send once a month each member of the organization the copy of the stereo card you created, and they would send back to you. So you would collect and amass these stereo cards. And he developed his own process for recording photographs. And I don't remember when the first time I learned of this guy was, but in the 1990s, probably early 1990s, I went to Dickinson and I found some of his work. And over the years, we just keep discovering more and more of his images. And he was in Lancaster County in early June 1863. Now, keep in mind, the Southern Army did not invade northern Virginia or into Maryland and Pennsylvania until like June 15th. So they have no idea the state of Pennsylvania is going to be invaded. But coming back from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where his family owned some property in Marietta, I think they had a furnace over there, he stopped and took a photograph of the Wrightsville Bridge. And we're at Wrightsville looking towards Columbia. As it would turn out, this is the only known photograph of that bridge because it was burned by the Southern Army on June 28th. And he was using a special process, some kind of dry plate, so that he didn't have to develop the image like a wet plate photographer on the spot, that he could record an image and then prepare it later. I have no idea exactly what he was doing. But, of course, the Wrightsville Bridge is 1.25 miles long. It had 2 bays in it for wagons. Actually, you could pull a railroad train across it. You'd detach the locomotive into cars and pull it across. You couldn't have the steam engine lighting the bridge on fire. You know, it didn't ride across the bridge. It was pulled across. And it had a double tow path for canal boats, because there were canals on both sides of the Susquehanna at that point. And it was the largest covered bridge that ever existed, ever, in the world. That's what we say. I don't know. Maybe in China there was a bigger covered bridge. I don't know. But isn't that awesome that he took that image? And I know the date of it. I was the one who got the date because I looked in his diary to see which day he took the photograph. No one else had thought of doing that. But they have it at, again, it's at Dickinson College. It wasn't like complicated. So this lady who lived on Broadway who gave us some Himes stuff recently, gave us this. And here he is from like an 1860 portrait. So Charles Francis Himes. And he actually came to Gettysburg after the battle, and according to a letter he wrote, he recorded some 25 or 30 photographs of the battlefield in July of 1863. We found 4 of his photographs at the Cumberland County Historical Society. There, right at the moment, that's the only 4 of the 30 photographs that we have. Somewhere out there are more photographs taken in July of 1863 of the battlefield. And, you know, boy, did I scrutinize this stuff in the attic at this house on Broadway. You sure you don't have a box of photographs? I need these photographs. But isn't that awesome? So a guy from New Oxford took photographs on the Gettysburg battlefield afterwards. So this is one of the 4 photographs that we know of that he took of Cemetery Hill right after the battle, the Evergreen Cemetery Gatehouse. Unfortunately for us, the Evergreen Cemetery Gatehouse is like the most photographed spot on the entire battlefield, so we have lots of photographs of it. So this one's not as exciting as some of the other ones. But we have a nice photograph of the Leicester House, and he says that he took photographs at Camp Letterman General Hospital also. And he was experimenting with photography. And here, in 1859, he took a photograph of the Washington House, which was the site of the original Coon Tavern at the northwest corner of the square. And so it's taken on July 29th, 1859, and it is the second oldest image outdoor recorded in Adams County. There's only one older image, and that's the courthouse in Gettysburg, and that was taken in May of 1859. So this is like the second oldest image in our county. You know, now there's indoor views, daguerreotypes of people sitting in chairs and stuff like that, but outdoor views. And again, that's probably a pump in the square in front. Now, of course, you know, is that right, don't you think? Oh, well. So the parts of this building still exist in the northwest corner of the square. So I just think it's a fabulous, fabulous image. And I don't know if you can tell, beyond this building, the street would be on the other side of the building, goes north out of New Oxford, but there's the Catholic Church back behind the buildings. You can see the steeple. But that's just incredible, just incredible. We do have another Himes photograph from the 1880s of the same building. And one of the reasons he's taking a photograph of it, and it's interesting that Becker, I think it is the owner of the Washington House at that time. And sure enough, during the date that he put it there, we have a license for that tavern that confirms that he is the tavern keeper at that time. But there's an 1880s photograph. The reason he's taking an image of the Washington House is his grandfather owned it at one time. And just to give you an idea, we have a whole book that people have put together on the tavern, the Coon Tavern, and these are the people that we know that had tavern licenses there, including Henry Coon, his stepfather, his mother, and his older brother before him. But there's Henry Coon, the founder of the town, and you can see that he had a tavern license, well, that's when the patent deed was given, they're saying, but he's got a tavern license 1790-91. So you can see the different people that operated the tavern there over the years. Let's see, where's that? Let's see, does we have the Becker guy on here? Maybe not on here. Oh, yeah. Well, there's John Beck. Yeah. Yeah. I think I probably have some better information in some of this. That's all right. So, and for me, and you know, anyone who's local probably knows that in 1974, New Oxford celebrated their 100th anniversary of them being established as a borough. and they published a little book. It's a little green book. You know what? I just saw one for sale. Where did I see it? I think I saw it at Zelma's at the flea market there in New Oxford. And it was pretty cheap. You can buy them. But in the back of the book, they had photographs. And it had this photograph, and it said Square of New Oxford, 1862. And I always just was like, whatever. Nobody's taking a photograph in the Square of New Oxford in 1862. And then, of course, later, I learned about Charles Francis Himes. And would you believe that this photograph is taken from like the second-story window of the Himes house, looking across the square in the snow? And there's no reason to doubt his date. You know, wow. So, and this photograph, I got this photograph the first time I ever, well, it's in that book. But in the book, it's really, the quality of the photograph's really bad. But I got the photograph at the, Carlisle at Dickinson. That's where I first got a hold of the photograph. And then, of course, the New Oxford Historical Society now has a really nice version of the photograph. And when I went to the Himes house, you know, or the lady who had all the Himes stuff here in Gettysburg, she had this version of it. It is crystal clear. And so, you know, we're looking east, you know, out Route 30. So the Scott and Brothers, I don't know what it's called now, but the jewelry store is not there. That building's not there. And the church is not there. Of course, the church is at 1871? 75, okay. But there's the church isn't there, but we're looking out, you know, Route 30 East. And look, I mean, you can really, really get some detail in this. Love that store with the thing on it. This one or that one? Yes. So the church sits out here. Very good. And you can actually see there's a sign of a shop. That stone building is still there. What do we call that? The Peters House. You see that? It says Aaron Hagee. And of course, here's the 1872 atlas. So we're actually looking down, you know, this street, and we can see the buildings along here. So here you see the heirs of J. Peters is that stone house that still stands there, right there on the street, the corner of the street. Corner of Peter Street. And that's probably why it's called Peter Street. And Philadelphia Street there. But there I got to see. This version I got of it is the clearest version I'd ever seen of this image. And also, besides the Aaron Hagee, I think I put something in here. Let's see. Yeah. So Aaron Hagee, in case this is his obituary, he dies. I forget where I got the obituary from. Charleston, Missouri. That's where he died. And I think it's 1906. But you can see he was born and reared in New Oxford in different times, conducted a general store in the place. So, you know, the amount of detail in there is just incredible. And on the 1858 directory, you can actually see merchant Aaron Hagee right there. He's mentioned in the directory. And the other thing I wanted to show you was down here, let's see, Dr. Peffer. And look down here, Dr. Peffer. Do you see this roof here? And you see there's like dormers on the roof there. And I think we'll see there's 3 or 4 dormers on the house. And we have a photograph of Dr. Peffer's house. And there's those dormers on that house. That house no longer stands. Dr. Michael Dietrich Gottlob Peffer. Yeah. I think for short in a lot of the records they called him Dr. MDG Peffer. So this guy came to the United States in 1818, landed in the port of Baltimore, and then came into Adams County. He was a Prussian soldier, and he was at the Battle of Waterloo. In one of the accounts, it says he's wounded at Waterloo, but in another account, he's actually wounded at another battle. Sounds more dramatic if he's wounded at Waterloo. Prussian, I think a Prussian, but it's yeah. Hesh would be from Heshy, and yeah. I think of course I'd have to look. It's been a while since I read about him. But he has a saber mark, it says, on his cheek. You know, in the Adams County account, a saber mark from the Battle of Waterloo. But he is one mean-looking dude. And he's a postmaster in New Oxford for a while. And he was a physician. And he started New Oxford College and Medical Institute. And for years and years and years, this was our only image of it. And again, it no longer stands, but if you ride out Route 30 East from the center of the square, it'd be off to the right as soon as you pass the edge of the town. And there is a Pfeffer Alley there you can see. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Pfeffer? Okay. Is PF always... I got to learn more about German, don't I? Pfeffer. I know in Gettysburg, I know it's spelled differently, but they have a Pfeffer family, and I'm getting the Pfeiffers and the Pfeffers mixed up. That's what's going on. So, but here is an 1880s photograph of the building. Now, he died in 1880. And is he one of the people you're pointing out the grave of on Wednesday? Okay. But he's buried in New Oxford, in the New Oxford Cemetery. And you can see the steps going up, and the building's already, in this photograph, abandoned and fallen down. And, you know, I say 18, I'm not sure when that photograph is taken. But eventually the building was torn down. So, best guess. So, again, you know, I'm looking through this stuff from this lady. Her name was Mrs. Johnson, that lived on Broadway here in Gettysburg. And just box after box of stuff. And in there, I found this. And this is a Charles Francis Hymes photograph. And here it is when it's active and open in like 1860, 1861, who knows? But it's right around that time. And so there you see it in all its glory. And I'm sure that's, you know, Dr. Pfeffer, Pfeiffer standing on the steps. There you go. Good. You see, I'm not from New Oxford. But doesn't it look nice? Now, he started this in 1845. So I'm doubting that we know he took a photograph in 1859, but he hadn't perfected the process yet. So I don't know when the image is taken, but he started this in 1845, and I'm assuming this is like 1860. But it's interesting, we noticed that there are letters across the top of it, and these letters are the same ones that appear on one of his diplomas. But there you go. Ooh, it's okay, I'm really zooming in on this image here, in this view. That's why it's in, I guess we could put it through some kind of process and try to make it look nicer, but that's how the photograph, it looks. But here's one of his report cards from the Institute. And does it have a date on the, I didn't even look. Oh yeah, 1860. But there it is. So there's, see, Dr., what is it? Yeah, and whatever his, I said whatever these initials, there it is, MDG, see? MDG. Oh, you know what? This is his son, Quincy Adams. Quincy Adams Pfeffer. Oh. Okay, I'm just going to continue to say it my wrong way. So New Oxford was affected by the American Civil War like many other communities all across the country. And, you know, just here, I have a few things at the end of the program here. Here, I wanted to show we do have in our local paper the political leanings of New Oxford, and you can see here's Abraham Lincoln and the vote tally he got. The Fusion ticket, which is a combination of Breckinridge and Bell and Stephen Douglas. There's the Fusion ticket, and you can see on here where's Oxford listed. I'm sure it is. There it is. That you see. So Oxford, and of course that's most of the township, but the Fusion ticket carried there. See, Gettysburg is heavily for Lincoln in Cumberland Township. Yeah. And East Berlin, I know East Berlin's against it. Berwick and they don't like Lincoln. And, you know, you can look at the list of it, and then you can look at how many people join the Army from these areas. And when it comes to time to have a draft, East Berlin has to draft a lot of guys because there's not many guys in the Army. What's interesting about, of course, an overall, if you add everything up, Lincoln carried Adams County by a combined 6 votes. So the collection, it was very close. There was a company from New Oxford established near the beginning of the war, and eventually they became Company I, 87th Pennsylvania. And this is eastern Adams County, you can kind of see, and you can kind of see they were organized in New Oxford. And the captain of the company was Thaddeus Stevens Pfeiffer. Thaddeus Stevens Pfeiffer. So, and he obviously was named after Thaddeus Stevens. And so there's very good evidence that MDG was a big, Thaddeus Stevens fan. And Thaddeus Stevens has a huge connection to New Oxford. And William Himes, who, we showed in that photograph at the Himes, Charles Francis Himes' father, was a business partner of Thaddeus Stevens, and they owned a piece of property in Gettysburg together, the property that's now the Plaza, the restaurant in the square. They owned it together for a while. But here's some of the guys' names who from New Oxford and Oxford Township that served in Company I, 87th Pennsylvania. And there's a draft in 1862 of people from Oxford Township. And I put this in here just because I had it and because, I'm imagining it's the same way they did the lottery for lots in New Oxford. So I want you to imagine, the giant wheel and the ping pong balls I'm sure he's going to pull out. But here's Oxford Township in the draft. And at the time of the Civil War, again, New Oxford is just part of Oxford Township. It's not its own separate political entity. And Solomon Brown there, I don't know if you go to the square of New Oxford and walk east, like 3 houses on the right, there's a sign, and I really like it. Was it a barber shop at one time? And they have a sign saying Solomon Brown lived here at the time of the Civil War. I think that's fascinating. So he's right downtown New Oxford. But, we have resources here if you wanted to research your relative and or a family member and see if they're drafted. We have the draft in October of '62 for every township municipality, including substitutes, which I didn't put on there. Now, in June of 1863, during the Gettysburg campaign, there was an emergency regiment made up of older men and young boys from the state of Pennsylvania. Company A is basically from Gettysburg College, and they get a lot of notoriety, in the story of the Battle of Gettysburg. This unit is sent back to Gettysburg and faces off against the Southern Army. But Frederick Kleinfelter is the captain of Company A. But Company I, I don't know how that got in. That's wrong. Company I of the 26th Pennsylvania Emergency Regiment was organized in Hanover. And the lieutenant of Company I is John Quincy Adams Pfeiffer. Is that right? Okay. So that unit is sent out along the Chambersburg Pike on June 26, 1863, and are attacked by Jubal Early's division, and then they retreat back to Harrisburg. So here's the interesting thing for me. Dr. Pfeiffer has a son in the 26th Pennsylvania Infantry Regiment, actually two sons, because Henry also joined. And then his son, Thaddeus Stevens, is in the 87th Pennsylvania. And Gordon's brigade had fought against the 87th Pennsylvania at the Battle of Winchester a couple weeks earlier. And according to an account in York, Pennsylvania, when Gordon's brigade marches through York, some of the men are wearing backpacks with the 87th Pennsylvania logo written or, painted on them. So we'll get to that in a second. So it's very interesting. In the Battle of Marsh Creek, no one is killed in the Battle of Marsh Creek, but about 40 Gettysburg kids and men of that unit are captured around Marsh Creek, and then another 250 are captured near Hunterstown. The unit actually consisted of a bunch of companies from all over the state and about 750 men. And on June 27th, Jubal Early's division marches from Gettysburg across Adams County. One of the cavalry detachment rides down through Hanover to Hanover Junction. 3 brigades, which include, like 5,000 men, march across to Hunterstown and up 394 and out 234. But Gordon's brigade marches from Gettysburg, along with a detachment of cavalry, through New Oxford on June 27th. And does, MDG, does he know that the unit that is marching by his house has defeated his son's units the day before at Marsh Creek? He doesn't know if they're alive or dead. And his other son, 2 weeks earlier, fought against them at Winchester and is missing. There's no way he could know if he's all right or not. And here comes the men who did it marching by his house. Does he know that they're the ones who fought against his sons the day before and 2 weeks earlier? I just wonder. But we have an excellent handwritten account of a history of New Oxford. And in that history, this person says on June 27th, he is sitting in front of his house glaring at the Southerners as they march by. And the Southerners are kind of scared of him. And one of them looks over and, according to the account, says, "Look, it's Jesus Christ." I just think it's a great account of him. But, Thaddeus Stevens, Pfeiffer. I'll never get that right. He dies at the Battle of Cold Harbor, and he's buried in the New Oxford Cemetery. So as the captain of Company I, 87th Pennsylvania Infantry, and he's got a very patriotic grave there. This is his image from the history of the 87th Pennsylvania. So he died during the war. I forgot my point about why I put the photograph there. So they, I know. I know why I put it there. Okay. So, and going back to the other person I was discussing, we have a personal account of the Confederates passing through New Oxford, written on October 2nd, 1863, by Charles Francis Himes. And, I don't think it's been ever used in any books. It's from Dickinson. They came in town and everybody was on a tiptoe. The dirty, ragged, lousy, hair-lip rascals from Georgia and Virginia, Gordon's brigade. They had rather fine-cut faces and looked every inch of fighting men. They were old Stonewall Jackson's men, and notwithstanding their appearance, were not to be despised. As they said, Uncle Sam didn't furnish their clothing, that they did not dress in their Sunday best to do dirty work. They were very orderly, only calling out, "We're back in the Union again, ain't we glad?" And, "Why don't you men in black put on the blue? The rebels are here." They were anxious to know what we thought of them, and said they only wanted to let us know the meaning of the word war, that they had felt it, but they would not imitate it. They would not imitate the conduct of our soldier who wasted every section they passed through in the South. Of course, I could not say or do anything that would encourage them in their invasion, but there was much truth in their statements and much logic in their arguments. They seemed very sincere and earnest and said the old Union was a grand thing, but it was gone, and now they were not 3-month men or 3-year men. They were 100-year men, if necessary. That the South was stronger now than it ever had been since the war began. I think it's fascinating that that he has an interesting, he's got a really good account. He talks in great detail about the Southerners ransacking the area. Of course, they burnt Golden Station, and they destroyed the railroad bridge over Conewaga Creek, about a mile northeast of New Oxford. And Mike and I went there one day. Of course, you have to walk out the railroad tracks like a mile to get there. It's not like near anything at all. And I was absolutely stunned. I mean, this railroad bridge that's there now, and it couldn't be much different then, is made of wood, and it must be 40 or 45 feet above the creek, and it crosses a large gully, which includes Conewaga Creek. So it was just fascinating to me that it must have been such a sight to see that bridge destroyed on June 27th. Of course, you know the story. On June 27th, the Confederates march from Gettysburg across Adams County and capture York on June 28th. And on the evening of June 28th, they destroy the Wrightsville Bridge, or the Union Army destroys it, so the Southern Army can't cross. And they gather supplies and provisions as they march across Adams County in the invasion. Of course, on June 28th, Lee gets word that the Northern Army is approaching and orders the troops back. When the Southern Army comes back across Adams County, they actually march by way of East Berlin, so only some Confederate cavalrymen pass through New Oxford on June 30th. But then, of course, after the battle, Charles Hymes is taking photographs of the Gettysburg battlefield. There's the bridge again. It was destroyed on June 28th. And I just think it's incredible that a man from New Oxford recorded the only known image of it. Oh, I didn't know I put this in here. So here's drawings of the destruction of the bridge. And I thought I had a picture of Hymes again on the battlefield taking another photograph. But that's where I'm going to stop my program. And again, if you'd like to hear more about the organization and the founding of New Oxford as its own separate taxable entity and incorporation as a borough, Mike is giving a walking tour of New Oxford Cemetery on Wednesday evening. So I'm going to end right there. And thanks for attending my ceremony or my program here.